welcome to this Sunday talk. As you may be aware, we have been doing a short study in the book of Exodus, a fly study to the book of Exodus. And you can revisit the messages in our channels of Facebook or YouTube if you are interested in following them. But today is our last study in the book of Exodus. And I think that we could actually say that what an end to the book of Exodus. What an end to this study of the book of Exodus. Now, Exodus began with the descendants of Jacob, enslaved in Egypt. You probably have seen, or maybe you have even heard about the famous story, so-called Joseph and the color coat. It was written by Andrew Lloyd Webber, but just to let you know that he didn't come up with that story. You can actually read that story in the Bible. But after many years had gone by, after many years have gone back and forth in the land, and a lot of changes had taken place. Joseph and the brothers had died, and a new Pharaoh has come in charge into the nation of Egypt. The life of the Jews was under the heavy oppression of the Egyptian Pharaoh. God takes a baby born in a Hebrew home and spends 80 years preparing him to be the deliverer for his people. When Moses is 80 years old, God calls him, God commissions him to go to Egypt, in the burning bush in the desert. Now here in Exodus chapter 40, where we end up our story and where the book of Exodus actually ends, this is approximately 1 year after the Israelites have left Egypt. Israel is about to leave now Mount Sinai, where they received the law, and they are going to enter a vast wilderness on their way to a promised home with God. God brought them safely through the waters that destroyed the army of Egypt. He made a covenant with Israel to be their God and for them to be his people. And even though they immediately broke that covenant by worshipping a golden calf and a sculpture, an image created by all the gold that they took out of Egypt, God renewed that covenant again, answering Moses' plea for pardon and for forgiveness and for restoration. And so they are about to leave this place, heading into the wilderness where they will face questions, fears and doubts. Trials and enemies lay ahead as they walk past hundreds of nations who will not like the idea of a new Hebrew nation restoring, looking for a home. And as troubled as that will be, their enemies around them will be. Israel will face a bigger enemy within themselves, because within each one of them lays a rebel heart, quick to rebel, quick to doubt God's goodness and God's promises again and again. Will God be with them when enemies threaten them? And perhaps even more interestingly, one of the questions will have to be, will God be with them when they themselves act like their own worst enemies? When unholy rebellious hearts show themselves, will God be with them then? When an enemy rises up, when their hearts rise up, I can imagine the questions on their lips, because I have asked it, is God really with me? You see, sometimes I question myself, is God really with me? I've been asking this question a lot lately. I look at what's been going on over the few months, or maybe even over the few weeks, and even in the last few days. And I can't stop but ask, in a world that seems every day getting more and more difficult to understand, with this pandemic of COVID-19 and the chaos that has created, let's not forget the challenges that are ahead. Once all of this normal gets back, we're talking about, what type of normal is it going to be? Whatever normal will mean, will there ever be a normal? Is he really with me when life is hardest? When my kids are wandering from the walk of faith? Is it with me when all the questions I have regarding my future? And I'm sure you have found yourself asking the questions, the same questions. Even today, even we, the God's church, we who have heard and believe the good news of Jesus, still wonder sometimes if what we heard is true. Because what we see around us can make us ask the question. When our marriages are strained, when our relationships are breaking down, is he really with us when our depression is at its darkest? When his weight of our depression seems the heaviest? Is he with us when these frail bodies fail and death is no longer a far-off thought? Is he really with us when we disobey, failing him for the 100,000,000 times? Is he with us when our performance of Christianity, whatever that means, doesn't measure up to his perfection? You see, Israel is about to set out, is about to leave Mount Sinai, to enter a vast wilderness on their way to a promised home with God. And it's not going to be late, it's not going to be too long before they will be leaving this place, heading into the wilderness, where they will face questions and fears and doubts and trials and enemies lay ahead of them, as they walk past nations who will not like the idea of a Hebrew nation looking for a home. And as troublesome enemies that will come around them, Israel will face a far more fearsome, a far more horrifying enemy within themselves. Because within each one of them, there is a heart ready to rebel, quick to rebel, quick to prone to doubt God's goodness, God's promises, again and again. God will be with them when enemies threaten. And perhaps even more importantly, will God be with them when they themselves act like his enemies? When unholy, rebellious hearts show themselves, will God be with them in his mercy? When the enemies rises up, when their hearts rise against God, I can imagine the questions on their minds and on their hearts and on their mouths. Is God really with us? They'll also face the everydays of life. They'll see the ordinary challenges of raising children and not gathering firewood, of trusting God for their daily bread every morning and for water for their lives and for their little ones, as the hot sand and the arid dry land where their kids are asking, what are we doing here? Why, while they are walking through the wilderness, when the water skins are starting to run dry, and can hear them asking the question. Each of us has been asking us, or he's been asking us of ourselves, is God really with us? Is God really with Israel when Israel walks into the wilderness? If they ever wonder if God is with them, they simply need to look up to the tabernacle set in the midst of the camp, to see the presence of God with them. Anytime that they doubt, they can look up and they see the cloud and the fire that fills the tabernacle. This will answer their questions. This will calm their fears. They don't live in a world where God is a distant deity like the other nations. Their God is not far away in the distance, made out of wood or stone or grass. For them, they can see the cloud and the fire in the tabernacle. In Israel's proof, that is a proof that God is with them, traveling with them, being with his people was his reason for rescuing them from Egypt. In Exodus 29, chapter 29, verse 43 and 46, God speaks of this tent of meeting. And he says that through his glorious presence and the work of the priests to God's people, that then they shall know that I am their God who brought them out of the land of Egypt, that I may dwell among them. I am God, their God, he says. In the face of fears and questions, this God gives himself to his people. He doesn't inhabit it anywhere. He comes down to be with his people. And within their eyesight, he is with them to meet all their needs, to quit fearful hearts, to set them apart as his people, and to lead them to their home, to their new home, to their new land with him. But even as God was with them to lead, verses 36-38 emphasizes the way that God leads his people through their journey, showing how God would guide his people on their way to the promised land. He says that when his cloud went up, it was time to go. If God and God's cloud, glory cloud, or God's fire didn't move, then the people didn't move. But think of how his visible presence could impact the life of the Israelites. How to know the timing of their moving on their travels. They could look at the tabernacle and see the cloud of the God who humbled Egypt with his power, finding people in the strength and fighting people in the strength and the love of their God. Or how may God's visible presence would impact the heart and the minds of the old women going out each morning to gather the manna God provided for her and her family. She could gather her food, and all what he had to do is turn around, lift her eyes to the place where her God dwelled in the tabernacle, praising him for providing again that morning once more, as he had every morning. In their severe trials and in their difficulties, in their everyday mundane or ordinary things of life, Israel had a God who was with them. They had a God who was with them, leading them through the wilderness to their home with him. Israel had every reason to trust him, to rest in his love and care for them. Israel had every reason to walk forward in the confidence of God being with them, because they could see it was true with their own eyes. But if Israel had every reason to trust him, you and I have even more reason. In a conversation with the religious leaders, Jesus said something that sometimes we totally miss. Jesus said something great. Jesus said this: something greater than the temple is here. During David and Solomon's reign, the tabernacle was changed by the temple. So in effect, Jesus was saying something greater, something better than the tabernacle, or something greater, something better than the temple is here. Now I can imagine the Jews of the day shocked and full of suspicion. Jesus, what are you saying? To say this was close to heresy, even blasphemy. Nothing could be better than the temple. Nothing could be better or greater than the tabernacle. This meant something better than Moses, better than the law, something even better than the visible presence of God in the camp has come. But this had been promised by the prophets, even during Israel's darkest time of rebellion, when the glory of God left his dwelling and his people. But even then he promised to return again to his people. Isaiah, in a book with some challenges to be able to understand, he said, "Strengthen the weak hand and make firm the feeble knee. Say to those who have an anxious heart, be strong, fear not. Behold, your God will come with vengeance, with the recompense of God. He will come and save you." You can read this in Isaiah 53, verses 3 and 4. Also, the last book of the prophets, Malachi, of the prophets of the Old Testament, and the last of the books of the Old Testament. He wrote it by himself, and he said, "Behold, I send my messenger, and he will prepare the way before me. And the Lord whom you seek will suddenly come to his temple, and the messenger of the covenant in whom you delight. Behold, he is coming, says the Lord of hosts." Malachi chapter 3, verse 1. And we can also see it in the books written about the life of Jesus. We hear that God has come again to be with us, and more closely than it was with Israel of the Old Testament. We learn that by believing in Jesus, he is in our hearts by his Spirit. Everything pictured here in the Old Testament, in the book of Exodus, teaches about who Jesus is. It teaches us about what he came to do, because Jesus is the radiance of the glory of God seen in the Exodus. Now we can learn that Jesus is better than Moses. Jesus is the true tabernacle. Jesus is the true temple, the perfect sacrifice for our wrongdoings and for our sin, and the architect of our redemption. So when God sent Jesus to put on flesh and make his tent with ours, John chapter 1, it shouldn't surprise us that Jesus was full of the Spirit of God, just like the tabernacle was, filled with glorious presence of God. And once Jesus left the earth after the resurrection, he deposited inside of his disciples, inside of each one of us, the present in each and every one of us, of all those who believe. Now God has a new tabernacle, a new temple. That is you and it's me. But as carriers of the presence of God, carriers of the message, the good news, the gospel, we are called to go out into the world to make disciples, to show mercy, to love one another, and to love our neighbors, so that they know God is with us. In this, we hear that we are to follow the pattern, to copy the life of Jesus, to empty ourselves in humility as he did when he put on flesh like ours, to serve others in love, to point them, as the Spirit does within each one of us, back to Jesus. How may that look in our family, in our neighborhood, as we encounter the people who live just across the street and 2 houses down our home? Could it be that a mundane meal, an everyday meal, could open the way for them to hear the good news of great joy? Could it be that an everyday conversation, an everyday gesture could be used by God to lead another person, another human being into the life with Him? Let's get out. Let's get out there and be the presence of God in our families. Let's get out there and be the presence of God, the glory of God, the tabernacle of God in our neighborhoods. And let's love people, all the whosoevers of this world. I just want to thank you for watching. I want to say to you, be blessed in Jesus' name. And until next time, bye for now.